The girls and boys were put together in one school eventually.
Sure, sure.
And then I worked in a machine shop for 3 years in Hamilton at the beginning of the war, from about 40 to 43, I guess.
Okay.
And to get into I wanted to be a pilot, and to get into the Air Corps, you had to have 2 years of college at that time.
Yes, I remember
Now, I was not subject to the draft until I was going to be 21, but I wanted to be a pilot, so I would drive down to Cincinnati. We were working 60 hours a week in the shop, and I would take off at 5 o'clock 2 nights a week and come down to Xavier College on Sycamore Street, right downtown here.
Sure.
And I took a few college credits. I only had 6 of them. And then they lowered the requirements for getting into the Air Corps. And by the time I was 21, I was going to be drafted then.
Right.
And I wanted to be a pilot, so I went up to Patterson Field on August 5th, 42, I think
How
it was.
about that? How about
And I joined the cadets, worked 6 more months in the shop till they called me in, but then went in.
Yeah. Going back a little bit, in your early days, did you have siblings?
Yes, there were 4 boys in 4 years, and then my sister about 4 or 5 years later. There's 9 years between me and my sister, who was the baby in the family.
That's interesting, yeah.
And one of my brothers and I were together in the service in the South Pacific.
In the Air Force?
Yes.
You started out in the Air Corps?
Well, it was the Army
Air
Corps at that time, and I signed up at Patterson Field.
Yeah.
And then I reported at Fort Hays, Columbus, and then was sent to Nashville Classification Center for about 3 weeks in February of 43, and then went to pre-flight training at Maxwell Field in Alabama.
Oh my gosh!
Lowell Thomas had a son in our same outfit. Came down once to.
So you got to meet him, huh?
No, I saw him.
I didn't. At a distance. Well, he was, of course. He was one of my heroes because he was such an adventurous guy, and wrote well and spoke so well on early radio. But you know, you're talking about your education in the military. It's quite remarkable what this country accomplished in a short period of time.
That is right.
And then, of course, after the war, the GI Bill.
The GI Bill is one of the greatest things that ever happened to the country.
Absolutely. It was a rebuilding of our nation. A lot of people don't realize
that was, and I think a lot of the government officials weren't 100% in favor of it, but they thought they had to do it.
They weren't. Well, you know, it was another Franklin Delano Roosevelt boondoggle.
Right.
You know, quote unquote. Well, that's wonderful. At Maxwell, that was primary?
No, that was pre-flight training.
Pre-flight.
I think that was 9 weeks, and we had the hazing system at that time, and you were an underclassman half of the time, and then you got to mistreat the underclass who followed you afterwards. And I remember Anthony Eden coming for a parade one day, and I think Franklin Roosevelt came down to that field one time I was there.
Wonderful.
And
well, you know, that was those times. It's hard to describe, really, what the spirit was and the feeling. And as you point out, important people from around the world came to this country a lot, of course. And of course, my great hero, Winston Churchill, many times. Anyway, now, after Maxwell, then you went to where?
Went to Jackson, Tennessee, and for primary flight training, and I washed out after 12 and a half hours. My understanding is that 85% of the candidates for pilot in the Air Force were washed out. They only took about 15% of the top people.
Right. And there was a period in the Navy when the same thing happened.
Same thing, huh?
All of a sudden, for some reason or other, we had this magnificent group of young men and some women who were ready to go, and the country and the system hadn't caught up with that yet.
Yeah,
So they had to let you wash them out, and then you get in a perilous condition and you need them back again.
Well, when they washed them out, why, I would say most of them became gunners on the big bombers and so forth, and maybe 10%, 20% got to go back to bombardier school or navigation school.
Right.
And that's what I was.
Well, that was a fortunate thing for you.
That was very fortunate.
I should say. Well, then where do we go from Tennessee?
Well, then, that was Jackson, Tennessee, and then we went back, and it was really a wild mess back in Nashville. There were a whole bunch of washed out characters there, and there were lieutenants come along, and they'd come in one end of a barracks, and guys that all leave the other. They were guys who'd been in the service a little while, see,
sure,
and
so they had
transferred from other stuff, and everybody, if they get captured for something, they would say, "Why, I think it was Alexander was the name they gave him or something on him," but it was something. But then I got a little furlough, and I was lucky enough to go back to navigation school. Went to gunnery school for, I think it was 7 weeks in Tyndall Field, Florida.
Oh.
And there again, at that time, I was afraid I was going to wash out of gunnery school, but they didn't wash anybody out of that. And we would, I shouldn't tell this story, but
sure you should.
we would shot every kind of gun that there was in existence at that time, and you'd usually mark down your own score, and a lot of the guys really lied through their teeth about how many skeet shots they made and so forth, and I was writing down what I got. But then the last thing was there was a big ribbon behind a airplane, and you were shooting machine guns, and you never got to count your own shots in that. So you shot with different colored bullets, I think. And at any rate, I got through that, and then went to navigation school at Monroe, Louisiana, for 19 weeks.
So you spent a lot of time in the southern part of the
South,
country. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, you're speaking about shooting and so forth. I'd never shot a gun in my life. And when I got into Navy training, skeet shooting was very, very important part of our training. And I just loved that.
Who did
I love skeets. Yeah. Well, I wasn't killing a bird or I wasn't killing a rabbit, but I was shooting those clay pots,
pigeon. Yeah.
And it was great stuff.
Did you have to carry a gun in the Navy on that ship? Did you?
Well, yeah. Later.
You had
later
guns
in the
available
war.
there, huh?
Later in the war, yes, we had we had a lightly armed class of aircraft carriers. Never meant to be up against the surface vessels of the enemy, and we learned how things could quickly change there. But we're so fascinated with your story. And where did you get your commission?
Out of Monroe, Louisiana.
Monroe.
And then after that, I went to Fresno, California. I got a little furlough, and that would have been in the wintertime. And one thing I remember about Monroe, Louisiana, that is northern Louisiana, and one time while I was there must have been a 6-inch heavy snow that fell down there in northern Louisiana. And but then I got this little furlough and went out to Fresno, California, and then from Fresno, we were assigned to Tonopah, Nevada, and that's where our 10 crewmen got together
Yeah.
for our B-24.
High desert country.
Yes.
Tonopah.
And when we went out there, on a train going out there, there was a 6-inch snow on the desert.
Yeah.
So, and I never knew there was snow on the desert. But that base, I think, was 7,000 feet high.
Yeah.
I remember the pilots telling us that it was different flying at 7,000 feet than flying at sea level.
Yeah.
With the air and so
Yeah,
forth.
that makes it. Yes, the air is much thinner, of course. But so there you were, and your next assignment was.
Well, we were there about 3 months, and I guess maybe they worked the navigator a little harder than the rest. But at any rate, that was pretty heavy. We'd get 2 or 3 passes in that 3 months to Reno or Las Vegas. We were right in the middle of those two. And then they sent us to Fairfield, Suisun, I think was the name of the base in San Francisco. And that's where we picked up a B-24, and we took off over the Golden Gate. And we didn't know where we were going until we were on that first flight.
That magnificent plane.
And it said Guadalcanal was our destination.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Big 4-engine.
Yeah.
Bugger. Oh my
We went
goodness.
to Hawaii and got 2 nights there, I guess, and then out to the tiny little atoll, Canton Island, out in the middle of.
Oh, sure.
Were you ever
I've
at
heard
Canton?
of Canton. Never
No.
got there, but I've
Just
heard
big
of it.
enough for an airstrip was all.
I
don't-
know. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that is right. And then we went to Fiji Islands, and we cut a tire on a metal runway, and we had to stay over an extra night there.
Too bad.
And then the next day we were in Guadalcanal at Henderson Field.
Now, when you hit Henderson Field, this is what, 44?
This would have been June 44. It was about the same
Okay.
time of the invasion in Europe.
Yeah, right. Well, that was just absolutely mind-boggling part of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you were south of the equator.
Mm-hmm.
You look up at the sky. You couldn't see the North Star.
Yeah.
You couldn't see the
You
dippers.
could see the Southern Cross
The
if
Southern
you were a
Cross,
navigator and
and
knew what you were looking at.
Right, and the great constellations like Aquarius, you
Yeah,
know, and
yeah.
Scorpio, and so
Yeah.
forth and so on. Well, that was something, and then of course they called the Air Force. Well, the Marines. I guess it was the Marine Air Arm of the Navy that was called the Cactus Air Force. Did you hear that term?
I didn't know that. One question I wanted to ask you, did you ever bump into Washing Machine Charlie?
Heard of him, but never.
Well, that was a plane would come over. It was a
Yeah.
Japanese plane.
Right.
And though I don't know whether he was gone in our day, but they sure talked about he would come over and I guess maybe drop bombs on Guadalcanal or something.
Yeah, I think that was a little after I was there, because we were transferred out in late March of 43.
Of 43.
Of 43. By that time, Solomons had really been secured.
Yes, yes, it
we
was
did.
secured. We flew our first almost practice missions, but we got credit for them, up to Rabaul
Sure.
from Henderson Field.
Bougainville.
Yeah, and we did those two, and I think they shot at us at Rabaul, but they had been wiped off, or they
Well, the
were
interesting,
bypassed by the forces at that time.
yeah, the interesting thing about that, by that time we had pretty solidified our strategy,
Mm-hmm.
and Rabaul was a great harbor,
Mm-hmm.
but we cut it off.
That is
and
right.
It was absolutely impotent. You know, I mean, they couldn't do anything.
Yes, yes.
Very interesting how those things happen. Well, then you flew out of Henderson Field.
Just for 2 missions.
2 missions.
And then we went to Admiralty Islands,
Manus?
We were on Los Negros, a smaller island, and I had a cousin was on Manus, and I went over there, and I know we were out in the woods one day, jungle, and there was a bunch of natives there, a big family, maybe 3 or 4 couples and kids, and
Fuzzy Wuzzies.
and the ladies didn't have any clothes on up above their waist. That was that was just
very interesting.
And at that time, I remember they knew the difference between Catholic and Protestant. They knew what those. Now, of course, they didn't know our language, and we didn't know theirs.
Not.
But
yeah, well, of course, that had been British territory, and the British had established not only the church there, but also the education system.
Yes.
And they got
But these people were living right out in the jungle,
One of the good things the British did.
Yeah.
But anyway, so where do we go from?
And then I think we were flying up the Yap, from the Admiralties, and that was a 12-hour mission.
Wow.
Now, I did 44 missions, and one story I want to get in here, and the pilot I flew with only had to do 42. Sometimes you'd have to substitute for a sick man or something, and I did 44 before I finished. He did 42, and when we finished all of our missions, our pilot, who is still living in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, he was not yet 21 years of age.
Just a minute.
He was still 20. and I was real old. I was about 23, I think.
I know you were an old man.
Yes, that's right.
I know I was too. You and I are the same age.
What year did you get into the service?
I got into the service right after Pearl Harbor.
Well, see, and I stayed home till 43.
Well,
February.
They didn't send me out. They didn't call me until about March of 42.
But that would be a year ahead of me.
Yeah, but and that's interesting. There are times in our lives when we remember certain great events. Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
I was in Oxford, Ohio, and we were rolling duck pins. There was little small balls for duck pins, and I thought Pearl Harbor was in the Philippines. That's as much as I knew.
Most of us did.
That's it. We didn't know where any of that stuff was.
I know they'd say Pearl Harbor. People would say, "What? Where? What's that?"
Yeah. No, I remember that it was a Sunday, I think.
It was a Sunday. It was indeed.
Now, the 13th Air Force that I ended up in, there were guys who were in Hawaii at that time.
Oh, yes.
And I've been going to reunions the last few years with that
Good for you.
But we're all dying off. We're going to cut out the reunions.
I haven't been to we had my second ship, the carrier, was pretty well organized outfit, and we set up a plan, and we had annual reunions for about 20 years.
Now, how many would be on the carrier?
So there you were with 44 missions. How did you like that consolidated plane?
The B-24?
Yeah.
Well, and of course, in my time down there, in the earlier days in the South Pacific, they had B-17s, but the B-24 could go maybe a quarter or a third farther on the gas we had a little better range, and there was only one B-17 that I knew in our area that I think one of the generals had as his plane to run around in. Of course, the 17 was built, was a little better favorable to the crew. Now the 24, now the 17 also had a low wing, and they said it might float 15 or 20 minutes if it had to land in the water. But the 24 with that high wing, if we ditched in the water, why we were going to go down. Go out, and you had to go out to Bombay anyway. That was our way out.
Yeah, that was really That was a dicey situation.
But of course now, I don't know about the fighter planes. The first plane that I know of that had a pressurized cabin was the B-29.
Mm-hmm.
Now our 17 or our 24 and the 17s were just there was no. And now one other reason I was happy to be in the South Pacific was that we cruised at 8,000 feet. We did most of our missions. We'd fly out alone, and then you'd hit a rendezvous point, a little island or something.
Sure.
And you'd get in, and in our 13th Air Force was a smaller Air Force. There was a 5th Air Force down there too, and they were a little larger than us, but we did not have the numbers that they would have had in Europe.
Right.
But we would fly out to a place. Now, when we were going up to Yap out of the Admiralty Islands, there was a little island by the name of Sorrel up there, which would have been, maybe 15 minutes away from Yap. But of course, the Japs were on that Sorrel Island, and they would radio the zeros when we're heading up. And of my 44 missions, I probably had zeros, maybe 15 to 18 of the missions that we had zeros coming after us. And I would say of the 44 missions, probably all of them, we had some ACAC to a lot of ACAC. Now, it wouldn't have been anything compared to what Europe went through. My 44 missions, the guys in Europe at the tough time had to only do 25.
Terrible.
Only do 25. The danger and the loss element was in that.
Yeah, that flak, that flak was just terrible stuff, because you could see it coming, and then it would explode, in the air near you, and you didn't know what was.
Well, one day we were up over the Philippines, and we hit a lot of ACAC, and a pilot and co-pilot were a little blasé sometimes, and my station was right behind them, and they didn't have their flak suits on with all this flak bubbling off, and I had to get up there and take their flak suits, and I said, I'm never doing this again for you guys if you don't put them on ahead of time.
Take care of yourselves.
Yeah. Well, and that's just like a glass window up there, and here I had a big steel plate to crouch down below behind there.
Yeah.
One time coming back from one of our missions, we had a radio compass, and as we'd come back alone, and generally, and a radio compass, it wasn't a good navigation tool, but it would honed in on your home base, and it would let you know if you were heading in the right area. And I said to our radio operator, who was right on the other side of there was a big turret in the middle of us, and he was the gunner in that turret. And at any rate, I said, Hutch, this the radio compass is just floating all over the place. And he said, I shot the aerial off when we were in combat a few minutes ago, And there was a big long aerial went out and hung, and he had shot that off. And of course these zeros, those times, you'd get a bunch of them, and they were nasty, and they'd throw phosphorus bombs at you, and you'd see the bullets, the fire between you and them. Our crew, I guess, shot down maybe 2 of them in our time.
Well, as you point out, the zeros were very, very maneuverable, highly maneuverable.
Yes, that's true.
But they did not have any protection for their pilots. They were so thinly built. And that was one of our great advantages. Our planes, were so well built, particularly the Navy planes, the fighter planes, torpedo bombers, and the dive bombers, and
late in the war, after you'd have to hang around, I finished my last combat mission in the end of January of '45, and somewhere in February or March, we flew some P-38 pilots up to Guam. They were some old P-38s up there they were thinking of getting and bringing back with them. But at any rate, there was a colonel going up on that, and one question I asked him, I said, is it true that we're shooting down enemy planes, 10 or 20 to 1, you know? And he said, yes, that's true. He said the Japanese, their basic pilots, a lot of them been killed, and they have young guys, don't know really what they're doing. Now, he said also in our P-38, we would not fly them one-on-one. He said our ideal way was to get 4 planes on one of them, and the 2 top ones would make a swipe, and the 2 bottom ones. But one-on-one, the Japanese Zeros were so maneuverable that they could come back and they could knock the one-on-one with the 38. You take one swipe and get out, you know. Right. Was the thing on that.
Well, of course, that began to develop our efficiency in that sort of thing after the Battle of Midway.
Yes.
April of 42.
On one of our missions, I think was after Midway, our target was a Japanese ship down beneath us, and we dropped bombs right near it, but we didn't hit it. I always hoped that it blew a hole in the side of the ship, but it was twisting around beneath us. And I think it was after the Midway one, or one of those big battles. It was the end of the Japanese Navy at that time.
It really was. And you pointed out so clearly that we managed to... Okay, now, you're flying out over Yap and...
Well, we were in the Admiralty Islands, and we just followed the war up. And from the Admiralty Islands, by, I guess, after 6, 8 weeks, or 8 or 10 weeks, whatever, we were there. And Yap was our primary target then another little island, Wolei was the name of it. I personally never went to Truk, which was a very tough target.
That was supposed to be
in the area. But then we moved up to a little island called Wakti. And right off, 3 miles off of New Guinea, and I think we were going up to Palau at that time off of Wakti. And one thing I remember very well there, one of our navigators, he thought he was losing his culture in the South Pacific, and I think he was a grandson of Darrow, the famous lawyer. And at any rate, one morning one night he had committed suicide, and they buried him on the island of New Guinea, just 3 miles from our island of Wakti.
Yes.
And then I did find out that just a year or so back that his body was later moved to Hawaii, to the cemetery.
Oh yeah, to the Punch Bowl there in Hawaii.
Yeah, in Hawaii. But we were on that Wakti, and I remember Bob Hope came to the island, and he was a little bit late getting there or something. I never even went over to see him. But we were only on that short time. And then we moved up to Numfor, which was in the Dutch East Indies. And it was out of Numfor that we flew 5 very important missions to Balikpapan, Borneo, which was the oil fields, maybe 12 to 20% the Japanese oil supply. And we flew, I think, was 5 missions over there. And that was where the longest mission I was ever in, the B-24, was 16 hours and 20 minutes. And I still have that navigator's log of that mission.
Yes.
And then there were 2 others, about 15 hours. And at least one time coming back, we landed a little bit short of Numfor, Sansapor, because we didn't have enough gas to do it. Now, those were I think it might have been 2 missions. We never could take fighter cover with us because we went so far.
I see.
And to that Balikpapan, that was such an important target. And I think the P-38 boys flew off of Zanzibar closer up. And they said, well, we're going to cover you on these missions if we have to bail out in the ocean coming back. And we would be on our way there, and that would be a 16-hour mission. So they caught up with us somewhere close to the target. It was timed. and they would just float along like this to go as slow as we were going. We were going as fast as we could.
I know.
And but now there was some talk that I don't know, even that Lindbergh might have been on some of the missions we were on, or Bong, the great ace of the Pacific, was
Bong, Richard Bong.
I think, but of course we never saw those pilots or talked to them or anything.
Well, one of the great pilots, of course, was right up the line here.
Gentili?
No, I can't think of the name. He was a fighter pilot in the ETO. He was from Piqua, Ohio, just right up north of.
There was a Gentili from Ohio.
Gentili, maybe that was Gentili. Yeah. I heard him speak once.
Oh, did you?
At Wright-Patterson Auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
This a long time ago, but because he's gone now. But he was a great guy. Well, how far north did you get? Did you get?
Well, then after Numfor, why we went to Morotai in the Dutch East Indies, and that was in the Halmaheras. Mm-hmm. And we were about 3 or 4 months there. Now, in the Admiralty Islands, it might have been 2 months. Oakti was, I think, only 5 weeks. And Numfor was not a long time. But then in Morotai, and that's when the invasion of the Philippines was going on, and
right.
we were closer to the Philippines there. And I think we were there maybe 4 months. Now, I had a brother who had also washed out of pilot training, and he was a gunner in a sister group in Squadron of the 13th Air Force, and lots of times we would be on the same island together. Great? And in fact, I had to wait 2 weeks when the war was over to come home, but I waited till he came through and we came home on
together.
The same ship. And it took us, we were sat in the harbor for 10 days waiting to start, and then it took us 15 days across. We got in about 4 o'clock in the afternoon at San Pedro, California, and they wouldn't let us off the ship. But who was down there on the dock playing the violin for us but Jack Benny?
Oh, for heaven's
sake. So I will never forget him.
Isn't that something?
Him for that,
yeah. Well, the speaking of that, the USO, mm-hmm. United Service Organization, was just a fantastic organization, and what they did for the morale of the troops around the world was just incomparable.
I think we had Irving Berlin one time in the island.
No kidding, yeah. Just imagine.
Mm-hmm.
What a treat, what a treat. I saw Benny Goodman and his band.
Did you?
And I saw Les Brown and his band of renown.
See.
And as a matter of fact, got to see Doris Day.
Oh, did Doris Kappelhoff, huh?
Yeah, Doris Kappelhoff from Price Hill.
Right.
She was Les Brown's girl singer.
Oh, all right.
What they call the girl singer.
Right. Yeah.
She was terrific. Well, anyway, now, did you have more memorable combat duty than you've told us about?
Well, of course, like these flights up to Yaps, that was the primary place where we got the Jap Zeros, although when we went up to the Philippines, we bombed Corregidor once or twice.
Did you really?
And I know one plane made a wrong turn going over there. They got 3 or 4 of their flyers killed. They got back, I think. We had gone the right direction. We got away from that. Now, I also, in 1980, I made a 4-month trip retracing my places where I was in the war.
Yeah.
And I went, like in 1980, I went to Rabaul to see it on the ground. See, now we had seen it from the air. Went back to Guadalcanal. There was a nice motel there in Guadalcanal, And I went to Bougainville, where I hadn't been during the war. And then there was a town in the Celebes. As we would fly over to Borneo, we would see that. It's just a nice white-looking town down there. And I went there in 1980. I spent 4 months in 11 countries retracing my World War II stuff. And ended up on that trip going to Japan and got to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and saw what had those experiences.
Right. Well, I've talked to. By that time, I was back stateside. I'd had about 3 years of sea duty in the Navy, rewarded me as stateside duty. But I've talked to several people who, such as. So, where were we?
Well, we had moved up and followed the war, and of course they had bypassed the Japs and a lot of bases and stuff like that. And the day I knew the war was over, we were flying up to Luzon. I guess one of our targets up there was Nichols Field, was our target.
Nichols Field,
in Edmond Hill, someplace nearby.
Yeah, Cavite.
And at any rate, it was right before the Lingayen invasion, and I would say for 15 minutes we were flying along, and all you could see out of the left of our plane was U.S. Navy.
Oh boy!
Big crowd. And that was the day I knew the war was over. Now I didn't know if it was going to be a couple months or a couple of years, but the Japanese were never going to stop us again. And there were some Corsairs or something came up to look at us to see who we were. You know,
I'll bet they did.
We were not over them, but we were not going to get over them either.
I'll say, well, and again, speaking of the Admiralties, were you ever in Ulithi?
No, I know Ulithi was in that group of islands someplace.
Yeah.
I remember that name.
That was the marshaling area for the U.S. Navy to invade the Philippines. And you talk about a site, you know, hundreds of ships.
Yeah, all right.
Hundreds on hundreds of ships all across this great harbor. Ulithi was a magnificent harbor, and it was well protected too. Had a narrow opening, but then this huge area inside. And of course it was a great, great anchorage. And so when you talk about seeing ships, you know, that you never forget things like that.
Yeah.
Now, how did you get to, did you get to Saipan and Tinian and so forth?
The day that we flew those P-38 pilots over, we went to Guam. And that's where I saw my first B-29, the first, and they looked so gigantic then, but now they look, all these planes look small in relation to the airliners, commercial stuff we fly now.
That's right. Well, the pilot of the Enola Gay that dropped the first bomb, the one on Hiroshima, died a couple of years ago, General Tibbets. But his co-pilot still lives down in southern Georgia, Dutch Van Kirk, and he was the co-pilot of the Enola Gay. And I have a friend who lives down there, and he knows him and plays golf with him. And what a thrill, you know. Yeah. This guy, he's described as being one of the great guys you'd ever want to meet in your life, you know. But we hear so many stories about that dicey time and the dropping of the bombs. We see people downtown in Cincinnati, you know, in my estimation, ill-advised, ill-educated, not understanding really what happened and what it's all about and why Truman gave the order to drop the bombs. What do you feel about it?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I ever heard of anybody who was involved in the war who didn't think that that was a good thing to drop the bomb. Because we had no idea if the Japanese had fought us to the last person, it would have gone on forever, and we would have killed everybody, and they would have killed a lot of us.
We would have lost a million.
So that, now of course you do have the problems. I would hope, now I got to Hiroshima or Hiroshima to their museum in 1980, and that left me with the feeling nobody ever ought to drop another one of these bombs.
I know.
And now where society, the world will go with that, I don't know that. But,
well, there's so many stories, and one that I've never forgotten, and I can find it, I guess, if I search hard enough for the book. But it is written in history that Truman, well, the Manhattan Project was started under Franklin Roosevelt. That was the building of the bombs. And the story that I read said that we did warn Japan long before the bomb was even completed that we had something that could be so terrible that they should never even consider trying to fight against it. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Well, and I do remember, I got home, I was out of the service before the war was over because, well, having completed my mission, and when Europe closed down, there were so many military personnel from Europe that they were not going to need me unless the war lasted 5, 6, 7 years or something again.
Right.
So I was home in June of '45, and then I went to the seminary. I was in the seminary on September 2nd of '45. But I was visiting cousins up near Albany, New York, when those bombs were being dropped.
Wow.
And, well, it just mystified all of us. We didn't know what they were. You know?
Oh, I know.
And then after the second one, why, Japan capitulated.
Well, it was a philosophical, psychological problem as well.
Yeah.
And I know that Truman felt very, very, very strongly about it, and realized also, you know.
Of course, they didn't know there was going to be all the collateral damage thing either.
Right.
And people living, burn up, and dying years later.
Terrible.
Of all of that.
But, you know, when we went into Japan, occupation-wise, and we discovered that, my goodness, they still had their factories underground. They were still building airplanes. They were building munitions. All this sort of thing that a lot of our people in this country don't realize. It's like the story of Dresden, Germany. Yes, it was terrible. We destroyed that beautiful city and the churches and the great architecture and everything. But we found out after the war that underneath the great cathedral in Dresden, downtown Dresden, here was a Luftwaffe manufactory, still building buzz bombs, you know. And well, now your reflections on your overall on your service and what it meant to you as a
well,
man.
it was a fantastic experience, and of course, if you survived it, it was a glorious experience. And I guess we averaged maybe twice a week flying. Now, of course, it would be a over a 10-hour average flight on that, but you would sit around in the tropics and play cards or whatever, you know. And it was, of course, I'm sure we were all totally glad when the war ended, you know.
Right. Well, there were so many, there were so many funny things, and then of course, television tried to do the Baa Black Sheep thing, you know, which was partially true, and then a lot of Hollywood stuff. But I can remember aboard the ship, you know, funny things that happened and crazy stuff, you know. And we had guys that jumped over the side and committed suicide, you know, and things like that. As a bombardier, no, wait a minute, navigator. As a navigator, you had a very, very important mission, and you had to be pinpoint accurate to know where you were going, how you were going to get back.
When the navigation thing got a little tougher was if you had weather and you were clouded over, and you couldn't see the ground. Now, our primary source was pilotage, that you'd see what was beneath you, and you would. Now coming back, you'd come in from up north to New Guinea, and of course that was a big island, so you're coming into that. You couldn't miss the island, but you had to know whether to turn right or left when you got there to get to your base.
Yeah.
So you'd have to, but then, but at night now, like on that 16-hour mission, we'd take off at 1 or 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And you'd shoot the stars, you know, the navigator would shoot the stars. And then it depended on whether it was a moonlit night or something. You could even tell what the land was down beneath you, you know.
You're reflecting back over the years. It just, and I've been very fortunate. I've had a good memory throughout my life. My dad, when I was a little boy, my dad said, "Son," I must have been about 6, he said something like, "Son, when you think back, sure, you're going to have a great future, but don't forget the past. Think back every day of your life. Take 3 minutes, think about it when you were a little boy, when you were in school, when you were in high school, when you played football, when you went to college, and remember those times." And he said, "You'll be amazed how that will serve you well throughout life." And it has, truly. And you as a man of God and a preacher and a scholar, you have so much to impart to the people you serve. And this experience that you have is fantastic. Yeah, I think it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
So you got back in 45 and you were out, and of course we were still talking about maybe we'd have to go to the Pacific.
Yeah.
Boy, that was not a good thing. The Navy did a wonderful job of handling people, getting them out, getting them home, you know, amassing the points and all that sort of thing to allow you to go home.
Well, I only had to do 2.5 years of active service. I had 3 years on paper.
Now, what about your family? Your parents, were they still, they lived through the war?
When I got home that summer, I had a brother who was in the ground crew of the Air Force in England, and my brother and I came home on the same ship, and it was our parents' 25th wedding anniversary when we were at home. And I had a brother in the Marines, the youngest boy, who was ready to go over to Japan at that time. It was before the war was over, and we were able to get him home on a leave, and all 4 of us with our sister were with our parents for their 25th wedding anniversary.
What a glorious time.
So that was, that was...
That was in Hamilton, huh?
In Hamilton.
How about that?
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful.
And, the day that Jack Benny was down there playing the violin, why, we got off the ship, and as we were on a train 3 or 4 days coming to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, well, then the rumors were such that maybe you'll be able to get out of the service,
Right,
you know.
right.
And which I was able to get out, and I was home.
Did you stay in the reserves?
No, I did not.
No,
I knew I was
I didn't
going to
either.
the seminary, and
Yeah,
I didn't want any part of the reserves.
Right.
And of course, at that time, with all the troops coming from Europe,
Sure.
who still had time to serve, why, they were not going to need me unless the war lasted forever.
I'll bet you've been up to Wright-Patterson
Couple times.
several times,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Magnificent museum.
Yeah.
And we have a great museum of our own. Maybe you don't know about it. It's called the Tri-State Warbird Museum.
Where's that?
It's out at Claremont County Airport, just near Batavia.
Oh, is it?
And what what that's all about, and Bob knows about it, is that it is where we restore World War II aircraft, not only to look at them but to fly them.
Ah.
We've got a Mustang out there. We've got a Navy torpedo bomber, the Avenger. We've got a B-25 Billy Mitchell medium bomber. We've got a Stearman trainer. We're finishing up on a Corsair right now as we speak that had been found in the jungles of the Solomon Islands after the war and flew in the Royal New Zealand Air Force, of all things. And we have that out at Batavia, and that will fly soon. And we also have a German, a Wehrmacht Focke-Wulf 190, which we've rebuilt out there. And the remarkable thing about our museum is that it's not a static museum. The planes are made to fly.
Where is that, you say?
Well, you just go out 32, and before you get to Batavia, you'll see signs.
Oh.
You go past Jeff Weiler's 10,000 automobiles, and you'll see signs that point to the Claremont County Airport Warbird Museum. And I owe Bob some literature that I'll get to him right away, and I'll include some for you so you can look at it, and you fellas get out there and you'll...
This book I have here is just a new book, and the woman who did this, her father was a medic in our outfit, and we had a medical doctor, flight surgeon, who was just a wonderful person, and he had gone into a burning plane one time that had crashed and got some people out, and he got a medal for that. And then 6-8 months later, he went into another plane, and a bomb exploded and killed him.
Oh my goodness.
And this woman's father was a medic, along with that doctor at that time. And I think he came home from the war and probably had his problems with all he had seen. And at any rate, she was very interested in trying to figure out what he went through during the war. And she wrote this about the 31st Squadron, and my squadron was the 72nd, but we were on the same missions, the same islands during this whole thing. And it starts off, well, they started in Hawaii, Hickam Field. Some of them were there. Our Air Force was there, and it was a tiny Air Force, the 13th.
Right.
And but then Guadalcanal, they were there and moved right up the line, the Admiralties, Wakti, Numfor, and ended up in the Philippines in the late part of the war.
Oh yeah. Yes, New Guinea. New Guinea was a fascinating place. It was
Yeah.
so mysterious. It's
And
so
big,
weird.
Big, yeah.
Yeah, you know, nothing like it else in the world. And a huge, huge island.
Yes.
That looks like a beautiful book. And I just saw your address in there. You're at the Athenaeum.
Yeah.
How about that?
That's
great.
where I've been retired, and I had spent 10 years just writing and traveling and writing about poverty problems and the church's role in that.
Good.
And I wanted to be near a good library.
Yeah.
And the seminary has an excellent library, or I wanted to be somewhere near this one.
Yes,
if
of
that
course.
was my second
Sure.
choice. And so that's why I've been living out there, just
Well,
as a
that's
guest
wonderful.
of the
Yeah.
seminary to do all that writing.
Well, it's a beautiful place. I've been there. I've been, our church, I'm an Episcopalian, and our church has had a lot of activities with the Roman Catholic Archdiocese.
What church are you in?
Church of the Redeemer in Hyde Park,
Oh, in Hyde Park.
right at the corner of Erie and Paxton. So I'm familiar with it, and I know what a magnificent place it is for scholars and everything else.
Yes.
Well, are we still? We're still going. We got 2 minutes.
2 more minutes.
Tell us a funny story.
I don't know any. Story.
How about landings? Landings on those islands.
Well, I'll tell you one that our pilot, one of our pilots, the one who was the pilot of the navigator who committed suicide, why he would bet his the crew members how many lights on the runway within so many lights when he was landing, you know, and he would do that. But one day when the Japanese Zeros were coming in pretty heavy, you know, he says, well, I got down under the dashboard and here's the co-pilot over here, and I shook his hand. I said, "Who's flying this thing anyway?"
Who's in charge?
Jimmy Davis. No, he was just a great guy. He's dead and gone now. And his wife, I'd gotten a note from her afterwards saying just what a wonderful man he was.
When was the last time you went to a reunion?
Well, I'm going to one on September the 8th
Oh, good.
In Washington, D.C., and they did say last year was going to be our last reunion. We're down to a small group, and
I know.
And then it's the children of the fired or the
vets,
personnel vets who come, and they will be 3/4 of the size of the group.
Oh, I know it.
But we only had about 20 veterans from the war the last time in NASA at the Houston.
Okay.
We were down there.
Yeah. Have you been to the World War II Memorial in Washington?
No, and I'll get to see that.
Well, you know, there's an organization called the Honor Flight.
I know that.
You know about that?
I know of them, and I've thought about tying in with them, but I've never been
Well, I'm going to send you some literature on it.
All right.
I've got a folder for you.
All right.
Okay. Well, you know, this has just been a fantastic experience
see,
to be with you.
You've been the same place I was.
Well, that was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen too often. I did have one experience over a year ago of a man who was a sailor aboard a sister ship of ours in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the battle off Samar Island. And I'll tell you quickly, and Bob's heard this before, but he was so funny. Funny guy. He came in with his sister. His sister was about 3 years older than he, and she's still living. They lived out in Cheviot, and she's I think she's a retired librarian or something like that. But she had served in a USO troop, and she'd been in the group that was the first USO troop to go into Manila after the Japs had finally given up Manila. Of course, you know, they destroyed that beautiful city. They just laid waste to it. But anyway, she was in that troop that went in to entertain our service people over there. While he was being interviewed where you are, she sat over there And he was a funny guy. He was funny as heck, and kind of profane, but not too bad. And he would say things, and you know, I'd ask him questions, and this is before I got to realize that he and I were in the same task group, in the same battle, doing the same darn thing. And on the 24th to the 26th of October, 44. And he was trying to remember something, and he'd go, oh, bleep, 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 can't remember. And she'd sit over there and she'd say, Addie, watch your mouth, watch your mouth. It was hilarious. He was a funny guy, cute fella. And he was a widower, and you know, he had children and so forth and so on. So we got about midway into the interview, and I said, well, he was a gunner's mate or a water tender or something like that. He said, I was on one of them baby flat tops, one of them escort carriers, and boy, did I prick up my ears, you know. And he said, I said, well, which one? And he said, well, I was on a doomed ship. I said, a doomed ship? What do you mean? Well, there's a tradition in the Navy.
Hello, my name is Ray Hughes, and I'm an interviewer for the Veterans History Project conducted by the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and locally administered by the Cincinnati-Hamilton County Public Library, and monitored there by Brian Powers, who is our cameraman today. Today's date is the 23rd of September 2019, a Monday, and we have the honor and privilege today of interviewing the World War II veteran, Father
Joe Beckman.
Joe Beckman, at the Athenaeum
of Ohio, which is where the Mount St. Mary's Seminary is located today.
And Father Beckman is a resident here. And the purpose of the interview is to record his experiences in life and during World War II. And Father Beckman, it is such an honor and privilege to meet you, and we thank you for this interview.
Well, you're certainly welcome.
If you would, tell us your date of birth and where you were born.
I was born November 5th, 1921 in Hamilton, Ohio.
And that means that in less than 2 months you'll be 98 years of age.
Yes.
I see. And what were your parents' names?
My father was Joseph Frank Beckman, and my mother's name was Aline, not a common name, A-L-I-N-E, Haver Beckman.
And her maiden name was?
Haver.
A-V-E-R?
H-A-V-E-R.
Oh, Haver. H-A-V-E-R.
Yes, and all my ancestors are German.
I see.
No, I remember my grandfather Beckman saying one time that he remembered when his daddy came home from the Civil War. So that branch of the Beckmans was around the Civil War time. But my mother's father, Henry Haver, came over, I'd say at the age of 18, something like that, to get out of the Prussian army or whatever it was at that time. And I think he would have come over somewhere around 1880.
I see. And what did your father do for a living?
My father was in World War I as a clerk in Chillicothe, Ohio, and he had a real nice handwriting, and he did not have to go overseas. But he would write about the soldiers that went through Chillicothe, and he'd say Jimmy Jones was here 6 weeks ago, and he's now dead in Europe, you know. So that was World War I. And then after that, he got a job, as I say, he had a real nice handwriting, as checking railroad cars somehow or other. And then my dad only went 8 grades to school, but the Vaughn Building Company in Hamilton needed a bookkeeper, and my dad took a course from the Knights of Columbus in accounting, and he became their bookkeeper and eventually the treasurer of the company, and worked with Vaughn's, and they built more larger buildings. They built the 8-story First National Bank building in Hamilton. It's one of them. They would build schools.
And what was the name of that company again?
Vaughn, V-A-U-G-H-A-N, yeah. Mm-hmm. Frank Vaughn was the boss.
I see. And was your mother a stay-at-home mother? Or
yes, she was. And I think my mother was maybe 28 or 29 when she was married. And in 5 years, they had 4 boys. And a few years later, my sister came along. And I'm the oldest of the bunch, and my sister is 9 years younger than me. And she is still living, she's homebound in Wisconsin, Abbey Springs, let's see, Fontana, Wisconsin, and Lake Geneva is the area.
Uh-huh.
And she lost her husband and 3 boys in a 10-year period, and she's broken a hip, and she's homebound.
What's her name, Father?
Mary Ann Smith.
Mm-hmm. And what were your brother's names?
My brother next to me, who was with me in the South Pacific, was Don, and both he and I were washed out of pilot training, and I got to go back as a navigator, and he went back as a very small gunner, riding the ball underneath the...
Oh, ball turret gunner?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a bad position.
Yeah, it was.
Yes. And the other brothers?
My next brother was Fred, and 3 of us, 3 of myself and 2 other brothers went to the service all in February of 1943. Freddie was in the ground crewman in the Air Force in England. And,
and Don was...
Don was...
was he on a B-24 also?
Yeah, he was on a B-24. And between Don and myself, we must have flown 85-mile missions, combat missions.
You had 44, didn't you?
I had 44, and he had somewhere between 40, maybe just 42, whatever, I don't know for sure.
Uh-huh. And as a boy, what was your address where you grew up?
We grew up on South 13th Street for my first years, but our family home then we moved to 307 Northeast Street in Hamilton.
Northeast Street?
E, yeah, in Hamilton.
I see.
And then my father died when he was 59 in 1952, and my mother was a widow for maybe 34 or 35 years and still lived in that old house till she had to go to a nursing home.
What church did you folks belong to as a boy?
Well, and that was one of the things. My mother wanted to be close to a parish, so we were 2 blocks away from St. Peter's Catholic Church, 2 blocks away from where we lived there on East Street.
And what grade school and high schools did you go to?
Well, all of our family went through 8 grades of grade school at St. Peter's, and then I went to what was Hamilton Catholic High School. All of my brothers would have gone through there, all of us, and which later was made into Baden High School. When we went to school, boys and girls were separated, but later on, about 1964 or 5, why they combined the girls and boys into what is now Baden High School.
And that's located in Hamilton?
In Hamilton.
Just curiosity, did you study languages in high school?
I studied a little German, and well, we had to study Latin, and I was never good in languages. And later on, I studied Spanish at 3 different fine schools, but I only got to where I could handle about 30% of the Spanish. I never got good.
So, what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1939, and I worked in a machine shop for 3 years, and we were making big lathes for the war, and we were selling some of them to the Russians at that time. And then I was not subject to their draft until I was going to be 21, and I did not want to be just drafted and put wherever they wanted me. So I joined the Air Corps, which was the Army Air Corps at that time, at Wright Field in August of 1942, August of 1942. And then they left me working in the shop for 6 more months.
What was the name of that company?
Niles Beaumont Pawn, Niles Machine Shop, and we made big lathes, all kind of major stuff. It was a major industry in Hamilton at that time.
Yeah. Do you, before we get to August of 42, do you recall where you were and what you were doing on December the 7th?
Yes, I do. I was in Oxford, Ohio. They had a duck pin, a small balls bowling alley, and we were bowling there when the news came across that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Now, I thought Pearl Harbor was in the Philippines. I didn't know that was in Hawaii. So that's where, and of course the day after that, or many young men, that was when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, many young men joined the service the next day.
Yes, correct.
And
that was December 7th, 1941.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so when did you actually go down to join the Army Air Corps?
Well, that would have been August 5th of 1942.
Right. Is that when you joined?
Yes, I signed up. And I was only in the service 3 years, and only 2.5 years actively.
What made you join the Army Air Corps versus the Navy? Or
I wanted to be a pilot.
I see.
And I didn't know anything about flying at all. But
did your brother join with you?
No, I don't know exactly when he joined. And he joined a little later, and he had to go to some kind of school for a while and stuff like that. Now, when I joined in February of 43, why I went to...
You joined in August of 42.
Joined in August of 42, but they let me work in the machine shop till February of 43.
Oh,
And
okay.
then my two brothers and I, all three of us, entered the service in February of 43. And for me, they sent me, I checked in at I guess, Fort Hays, Columbus, but then I was sent to Nashville and then went through training in the Air Corps, and I ended up at Jackson, Tennessee as a pilot trainee, and I washed out of, they would wash out, I think they washed out one way or another. 85% of the fellows came. They only came the top 15, and I was very lucky. I guess my ground grades were good enough or so forth that I was sent back to navigation school.
What kind of plane were you flying in your
I
training?
was the PT steerman then, and I did 12 and a half hours, and they didn't let me do solo.
They were deliberately washing out a lot of people
Oh,
at
yes,
that time.
yes, they did. They were only after the best. Yes, and each squadron leader or the civilian instructor, each instructor had five cadets that he would, and yes, I would. My figures were that 85% of the guys who applied to get in the Air Corps were washed out for health reasons, eyesight, whatever, all the way through.
Yeah. So, when did you find out you were going to be accepted as a navigator?
Well, I washed out of pilot training, and I was there for just a few days. We had to wait to be sent on to the next situation.
Is that at Jackson, Tennessee?
That was Jackson, Tennessee.
Where is that located at?
I'm not positive of where Jackson is, but after that, they sent me back to Nashville, and I was there. There must have been just a big group of guys who had been washed out of pilot training, and they had been in the service a few months, and they were a pretty unruly bunch, and the poor officers in charge of that group, they'd come in one end of the barracks and guys would leave in the other end. But at any rate, from there, then I got sent on to navigation school at, well, I first went to gunnery school in Panama City, Florida, Tyndall Field. Mm-hmm. So I did 7 weeks of gunnery school, and then I was sent to Monroe, Louisiana for navigation school for 19 weeks.
What base was that at Monroe?
Monroe, Louisiana, Selman Field.
Selman Field.
Selman Field, yes.
Tell us, and it was 19 weeks of training there?
Yes.
And what rank are you now? Are you still...
Well, I was commissioned at the end of those 19 weeks, and I was a second lieutenant. And then went overseas, and when you were about halfway through if you were alive, halfway through your combat tour, well, you automatically got a promotion. So I ended up as a first lieutenant.
Tell us about the training at Selman Field in 19 weeks.
Well, of course,
you're a high school graduate at this time, is that
That's right. I had 6 college credits was all. Mm. So I was a high school grad, and we did a lot of ground school work, but we flew, I'd say, about 20 missions studying navigation, and we would fly go to various bases, and sometimes we'd overnight at one, but we would fly. And if guys got flight sick or something, sometimes it'd be bumpy. Why, some of them could be washed out of it on the basis of that, you know. And
now, did you learn celestial navigation?
oh yes, we had learned celestial, and in combat later on, why we would take off at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you would use celestial. And even in the daytime, where you could get a sun shot, and you could, with your sextant or octant, whatever it was, or you could get a long line at which you were on. Now, with the octant, now, usually what you would try to do at night is get 3 bright stars in a triangle, and where those 3 intersected, you would move them on a little bit for the time difference and all. That's where you were supposed to be in that section. Now with the sun line in the daytime, you were somewhere on that line, but you didn't know where you were. You didn't have any line to cross it, you know. But it was a help to know where you were.
Well, they relied on you. Their lives actually relied on you, and many times.
Oh, well, a lot of times. When my crew first started to appreciate me, why we got together. We spent 3 months getting together as a crew in Tonopah, Nevada, at I don't even know the name of the field there. And at any rate, why, we would fly missions. I know one time we thought we were bombing or a practice mission over California. I think one of the plane bases or something down below.
Well, so we keep it chronological. After the 19 weeks, you're graduated as a navigator.
That is right.
And
I got a little furlough, about 10 days or 2 weeks at home. And then I reported to Fresno, California. And then from there we went to Tonopah, where we got our operational training for 3 months.
Were you assigned to a crew there?
Yes, at Tonopah.
And you would fly simulated missions all the way down to California?
We were over the Grand Canyon and anything.
And what kind of a plane are you flying there?
We were flying, I don't know whether it was a Constellation or what it was. It was not, we were flying some planes that I didn't know at the time that had come back from the war. We were flying in B-24s, and some of them had bullet holes in them from the war, and later on, I think a good number of them crashed, not in our time, but that's what we were training in the B-24.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And do you recall who any of your crew members were?
The pilot, we had one fellow who was 34 years of age, and he got sick every time we flew, so he had to leave us. And then we had an engineer who was sick for a while. We had a substitute there. But our pilot, after we finished 40-plus combat missions in the South Pacific, our pilot was not yet 21 years of age.
Wow.
He was just close to 21. And I was real old. I was 23 when we finished our 40-plus missions.
What was his name?
Doug McMillan. And I have a picture of him in there. And our crew got together for reunions years later, 4 or 5 times, and often in Florida. 3 of the crew members lived in Florida, and the co-pilot would take a month's vacation at Daytona Beach, and the pilot would go down there for the racetrack at Daytona.
Yeah, Daytona 500.
So in the middle of that, we would have a 3 or 4 day reunion, about 3 or 4 times.
So, how long were you there at, how do you pronounce that name again?
Tonopah?
Tonopah. How long were you there training then with your
Well,
crew?
3 months. And then they sent us to San Francisco, and we were at Fairfield, Suzanne was the name of the base there.
Fairfield, Suzanne.
Yes. That is at San Francisco.
I never heard of that base before.
Uh-huh. And that's where they gave us a brand new B-24. And the first day we headed out over the Golden Gate, and we had an oil leak, and we had to turn around and come back. But the second day, and I don't think until we got in the air, we didn't know where we were going, but we were told to go to Guadalcanal. Now, the first leg of the journey
when was this?
This was early June of 44.
Gotcha.
And we went to Hawaii, and we were there 2 nights. And then the next leg of the journey is when they started to appreciate me. From Hawaii, we went to little Canton Island, which is just big enough for an airstrip. There might have been 1 palm tree on it, and it was very warm and hot. But we flew from there, and there was nothing between Hawaii and Canton Island. So when we found out, the crew started to appreciate me. And
yeah, that had to be an exhilarating feeling for you.
Well, yeah. Now we had good radio in the U.S. part of our journey, like on the way to Hawaii. When we flew from San Francisco, there were 3 weather boats out in the water, and we saw one of them flying through. So it wasn't likely you were going to mess up on that. But there was nothing between us from Hawaii to Canton Island. And then after Canton Island, we flew to Fiji Islands, and we cut a tire on a metal runway, and we stayed an extra night there at Fiji. And then the following day, we landed at Henderson Field in Guadalcanal.
And what was your mission there at Henderson Field? Was that going to be your home base, or?
We were there. That was kind of getting people, new crews to learn. We flew 2 missions up to Rabaul, which had been placated or had been crippled up, but we flew up the slot in the Solomon Islands. 2 missions, they were very easy. We might have had a little shot or 2 from the ground, but Rabaul was dead as a Japanese mission at that time. And then we flew those 2 missions, and then we went to the Admiralty Islands. Mm-hmm. And I think from there we were flying to Yap.
Yep.
Was one of our targets, and that was a 12.5-hour mission.
Flying out of Admiralty?
Out of the Admiralties. Los Negros was the island we were on. And yes, and we flew that to Yap. And then we flew some to Palau, was another one, probably out of the Admiralty Islands.
And you're on these missions, you're dropping bombs on the Japanese?
Well, we did an awful lot of times to drop bombs on the Japanese runways so they couldn't get planes off to bother other people. Once in a while we would drop bombs on a housing section where the Japanese troops were supposed to be, something like that.
The barracks.
But a lot of our missions were just to drop bombs on the runways so that the Japs couldn't get planes off. And after the Admiralties, we went to Wakti Island, which was a tiny little island inside of New Guinea, right off of New Guinea. And
how do you spell that?
W-A-D-K-E, or W-A-K-D-E, Wakti.
Yes. That's
And we were there, and we might have gone to Palau from there, and then we were not there terribly long. And I remember Bob Hope came to the island while we were there, but it was just a tiny island, long enough for a runway, and just the troops, the Air Force, jammed in on that island, and we probably were there maybe only 5 weeks or something when we went to Numfor up near Bayak, and Sansapor was the next mission on.
That's right off of New Guinea.
Yeah, in northwestern New Guinea.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Bob Hope actually was on Wadki Island?
Yeah, he came there.
A little island.
And he was late getting there, and I didn't even go over to see him.
You missed all the good-looking women.
That is right.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know why. But, well, at that time, I don't know, maybe we'd fly twice a week or something. But when the invasion of the Philippines came a little later on, we were flying almost every other day for a while.
The invasion of the Philippines, if I remember correctly, the first one was September the 20th of 40, or September and October of
44.
Yes. What was your occasion to land on Sansapor Island?
Well, that was out of Numfor. We flew to Balikpapan, Borneo, which was supposedly 12 to 20% of the oil supply of Japan. And our outfit flew 5 missions there. And the longest one I was on was 16 hours and 20 minutes. We would fill the front half of the bomb bay with big gas tanks and just have bombs in the last half. I used to joke on these long missions that we'd fill the whole bomb bay up with gas tanks, and when we'd get to the target, we'd throw hand grenades out. But we did have, but we only had half of our bombs. We would have gas in the front end. But one of the missions was 16 hours and 20 missions, and 2 others I was on. There were 5 of them, and I was on 3 of them. I flew for a sick navigator on one of them. Were 15 hours, and on one of those 3 missions, we landed at Sansapor, because Sansapor was maybe 45 minutes closer to Borneo than Numfor, and so we didn't have to fly as far. And on my 44 missions, we only had fighter cover 2 times, and they were on the missions to Borneo, the P-38, the fellows, and they said, if we have to bail out coming back, we're willing to cover you guys. And that was, I'd say that was, Balikpapan was the toughest mission in our outfit. One I was never on earlier was Truck, that our outfit was on, and I never had to go there. That was another tough one. Yap was another one, and I'd say 15 to 18 times we had Jap Zeros at Yap, I think at Palau, and certainly at Valley Papan, and we'd go to the target and drop our bombs, and then the Jap Zeros would come after us, but they could not go very far. They didn't have enough gas, so if we could get away from them, why, that was, we were...
Was your plane hit by the Zeros?
They threw phosphorus bombs at us. I don't know them ever hit. We were only hit twice, but you would sometimes see the plane next to you be knocked out of the sky. And if they could knock an engine out, why, the planes would have to, the crew would have to jump out or bail out. And one nice thing, the Air Force had submarines covering us, and then there were PBY flying boats who would come up and cover us. And if we were, now on one of the Valley Papan missions, one day, why, we were sitting playing cards, and the Squadron bombardier borrowed a navigation book from me and a flashlight and whatever else, and they went on that first mission to Valley Papan, and they got shot down. And I think it was maybe 6 of the guys, the guys in the back end of the plane, they came up to the front. The colonel who was flying with them that day, why, he said, when I ring the bell, get out, bail out. But one of the guys in the back of the plane had left his parachute up in front. He came up to get it, and the front of the plane was empty, flying on pilot, the automatic pilot. And of the 6 guys who got out at the back end, of the 10 guys, 6 of them, I think, floated in the water for 3 days. And on the second mission to Valley Papan, I saw a yellow dye marker down in the water, and it turned out to be, I didn't know who it was or what, but it turned out to be these guys that I was playing cards with right before that. And this navigator who got killed in that thing, why, he owed me about $3.50 in the card game. And at a reunion one time, I complained. I said, that guy never did pay me off. They said, don't worry about that. Why, think about the next time you see him, all the interest he'll owe you. But there, we were sitting there playing cards, and then they never came back. Now the submarine picked those guys up, floating down there, and they were back in the outfit within a week, but they never had to fly again.
Is that right?
Yeah.
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 Wow. That's there, but for the grace of God, you would have been.
That is exactly right, yeah. In our plane, one day the co-pilot called me up, and about 6 feet in front of him, why, there was a big hole in the, and of course our planes were just kind of tin.
In the fuselage there was a hole?
No, this hole, about 6 feet in front of the co-pilot, was a hole. And it was years later at one of our reunions, I said, Philip, where'd that hole come from? He said, well, it came in from the bottom of the plane and out the top is what it was. It was Akak. And the bombardier and the nose gunner would have been down there. It must have just missed them, you know.
Yeah.
And then one other time, one of the gunners in the back end of one of the waist gunners, why, he called me back, and the same thing had happened in the back end of the plane. A piece of ack had gone through the plane, and it was a hole in top and hole in the bottom.
That was very thin sheet metal anyway, wasn't it?
That is right. That is right.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah.
You know, just you keep saying our outfit. What Air Force and bomb group and wing?
Well, we were the 13th Air Force,
Uh-huh.
and it was a relatively small Air Force, and they called it the Jungle Air Force. And there were two heavy bomb groups, the 307th and the 5th Bomb Group.
307th and the 5th Bomb Groups?
Were the groups, and each group had four
Squadrons?
4 squadrons, yes. And I was in the 5th Bomb Group, and I was in the 72nd Squadron.
72nd Bomb Squadron?
Mm-hmm.
Did your plane have a name?
No, we did not fly. We flew a brand new plane over. It was number 280, and of course through the combat time, my planes, newer editions had, at one time they didn't have a nose turret and so forth and on, and they kept making them a little bit better.
You never did paint a name on the fuselage?
No, we didn't.
No.
We didn't fly the same plane. We would fly different ones.
Oh, okay.
And I never knew how the pilots, they never seemed to bother them.
But you kept the same crew no matter what plane?
Oh, we kept same crew. Once in a while somebody'd be sick or something like that. Why, we lost a crew member or two through the missions. I flew 44 missions, 450 hours, so we averaged over 10 hours a mission. Now we would have a few that were maybe 5-6 hours or something. The average was 10 hours a mission.
How many bombs did you carry on a mission, do you recall?
Well, it depended on what the target was. Sometimes we'd carry, and I am in dementia a little bit, bombs, fragmentation bombs. We would carry 250 bombs. We would carry 500-pound bombs. I don't know.
Did you ever carry any of the what they called those bomblets that started fires whenever you dropped them?
Well, I don't know what those fragmentation bombs were. They might have done that. Or one day I think we had them, and we were supposed to bomb a section where in the Philippines where the Japanese military should have been. And that day we dropped our bombs to the right of that. We didn't even hit that section. Now we always had a photographer in the plane who would take pictures of what we had dropped. And one day, our gunner, who was one of those tail gunners, had a camera that was too small, and it went right through the slot, fell out of the airplane on down, so he didn't have the right size camera.
Where were you flying out of when you were on the flying in missions in the Philippines?
Well, we moved from Numfor, we moved to Morotai Island in the Dutch East Indies, and we were on that island 3-4 months. And that's where, that was right before the invasion of the Philippines, and we were flying, that's when we were flying these missions. I probably saw every island in the Philippines in our journeys. We would, Negros was an island we bombed frequently. We went to Palaman, it was another island. Cebu and different islands. And then we had a target. We bombed Corregidor once or twice, and Nichols Field on Luzon was our favorite, or one of the targets we had. So these were the...
Continuing, you were flying out of the Dutch East Indies, and when you were bombing the Philippine Islands?
A lot of it. Now, I'd say out of
Morotai?
Out of Numfor, we probably were going up to the Philippines. And then when we... now in Numfor, that's when we went to Balikpapan. And out of there, I got a list of all the missions I was on. But I think that was our primary target out of Morotai. That was prior to the invasion there, and we were going up to, and for a while there, right about the invasion time, we were flying almost every other day for a while.
Did you have a lot of encounters with the Japanese planes on these missions attacking you?
We only had about, out of my 44 missions, I'd say 15 or 18 times we had the Jap Zeros.
That's enough.
Well, that was plenty, yeah.
Once enough.
Yeah.
15 or 18 times.
Yeah.
Did you have any cover, any help from...
Oh, no, we didn't have cover. Only 2 times out of 44 missions did we have Japanese, did we have fighter
protection.
cover. Yeah.
And well, you must have had some excellent gunners to thwart...
Well, one thing, we would normally, we would fly out to a rendezvous point, and then we would get 6 planes together. And the closer they were, and then they had guns going all over, see, and that's why. And if it turned out that a flyer couldn't stand the pressure or something, why, he was relieved it was flying, because you couldn't, even one gun, you had to have all the guns against the Japanese. Of course, our primary thing was dropping the bombs, but 15 or 18 times we did have Japanese Zeros, and they were shooting down some of our planes, you know. And at one time they were throwing phosphorus bombs. Now, if a piece of that phosphorus had hit an engine, that could knock the engine out. And generally, if you lost an engine, you'd have to bail out.
Did you guys, you carried life rafts and things on your...
Yes, yes. Now, I don't remember where I carried it or whether it was in my life raft, but I had a .45 pistol, and we had buckshot that if you got shot down in the jungles, why, you might be able to shoot a parrot or a lizard or something to get a little food. Now, we never had...
You had buckshot in the .45 shells?
We had some with the buckshot in there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we had those, we had that, and I can't remember. My job over the target as a navigator, why, the bomb bay doors were hydraulic, and there was a handle there that that opened those doors, and my job over the target was to keep pushing that handle so the doors, if the doors crept shut, the bombs wouldn't go out, see? And so that was my job. Now, I couldn't put my parachute, they hooked onto my chest, and I couldn't put my parachute on that and I'll do that. So I would have my parachute with about a 3-foot little belt cord of some kind, and I'd have my parachute attached on to me that way. Now I was sitting. There was maybe about a foot strip down through the bomb bay, and on both sides, when the doors were open, was 15,000 feet down or something. So I never heard of anyone bouncing out. But here I'm sitting without a parachute hooked on, and if I had bounced out, I hoped I would be able to snap that on the way down, you know.
Oh my goodness!
But that was one other time. One good friend of mine, why his plane got shot up over the target, and they had lost an engine, and their hydraulic system was out, and I guess he got hit before the target, and at any rate the bombardier had to go out and release the bombs by hand to get rid of the bombs, and in so doing he kicked out his parachute harness, and so the plane's coming back without hydraulic. They couldn't get their wheels down or anything. And the pilot told the crew, he said, well, our bombardier doesn't have a parachute, so I'm going to have to land this plane. He said, no, I give you crew members a choice. I'll fly over and you can bail out, but then I'm going to have to come back in and land the plane. And I think about half of the crew bailed out, and one of them broke his leg, I think. But then the pilot landed.
I made a belly landing?
Belly landing. He didn't even scratch the bottom of the plane. Within a month or so, he was a captain and the head of the outfit. Yeah, Clyde Dooley. He was from Michigan. Good friend of mine.
Wow.
But he had to if Steiger didn't have a parachute, the bombardier.
Yeah. What a story.
Yeah.
Gosh. So did you stay at Numfor as you're flying your last missions, or did you move on?
Oh no, we were on Morotai, and I finished my combat flying the end of January of '45. I think the 29th was the last mission I flew, and then it took 2, 3, 4 months for you to get everything in order to come back home.
Where were you at when you finished your last mission?
I was on Morotai, and then our outfit moved up to Cebu, an island in the Philippines.
How do you spell that?
Cebu.
Yes.
Cebu,
Mm-hmm.
an island up there, but I wasn't. Now during that time, so you would get flying time. You got, I think, half again your salary for flying time. They would let you fly missions. I remember once we flew to Townsville, Australia, to get some spark plugs or something. One time I think we flew out to get a load of meat for the general into Australia. And then one time we flew some P-38 pilots to Guam. They were thinking about picking up some old P-38s, which they never took. And I asked the colonel on that. I said, Colonel, is this true that we are getting rid of the Japanese planes 9 out of 10? Why, we're destroying them. He said, yes, it is true. He said one thing, and this was late in... I was on this mission after I finished my combat. He said the Japanese have young kids flying their planes and all now, for one thing. And he said, and then, now he was a P-38 man, and he said, a P-38, we would never fight a 0 one-on-one because they were maneuverable. He said what we would try to do is get 4 P-38s, and we'd have him down here, and the top 2 would make passes, and 4 of us, and on that. And of course we had outnumbered him at that time with planes and all. He said, but yes, we were destroying the Japanese pilots.
Why did your combat missions end at 44 and not at 50 or 40?
Well, in the toughest time of the war in Europe, 25 missions was enough to get you finished with your tour.
Right.
Now, they prorated, I always felt they prorated the danger of dying and all. And in Europe, 25 missions was, if you made 25, or you were free. In our part of the world, why the missions weren't, they didn't have the Messerschmitts, and the ACAC wasn't as bad, and we didn't have to fly as high. Why, it was between 40 and 45 missions we had to fly before we were finished.
And at what altitude did you fly most of your missions?
Well, our cruising, 80% of our flying was alone over the ocean. And then you'd fly up to a rendezvous point. You'd get together with 5 other planes, and you'd go over the target. And when you'd get away from the target, well, you would fly home alone. So 80% of our flying was alone.
I see.
So you weren't, well, it was a lot gas consumption.
And you were at, what, 15,000 feet or higher?
Well, no, our cruising altitude was 8,000 feet.
Because that was not pressurized, correct?
Oh, heavens, no. No, we weren't. The B-29 was the first, and they only pressurized part of that plane. No, we were not pressurized.
Yeah, so most of your missions were at 8,000 feet?
Oh, no, the missions weren't. Then when you'd get to the target, it would depend on the target and what kind of opposition he had. The highest I flew on that Balikpapan stuff was 19,000 feet. But we would do that. A lot of times we'd go to 14,000, 15,000, depending on target in the Philippines and
Are you on oxygen then?
And when at 10,000 feet we'd go on oxygen, yes.
And how did you keep warm?
Well, we didn't have any heat in the plane, so you had your jacket and all that. That was one reason I was glad to be in the Pacific, because if it's 0 on the ground in England and you fly 20,000 feet high, why, that's terribly cold. You had to be on oxygen. If you got off the oxygen, you could die without oxygen. Now, I've traveled to 100 countries, all told, since the war, and I would be in Bolivia or something, and Lake Titicaca down there, the surface of the lake is 12,500 feet, so you can, but there would be also missionaries down there who would be in that altitude and thin air for a while, and then they would have to come down to something that was more normal. They couldn't take it. So 10,000 feet, but that's when we put our oxygen masks on. And no, most of the missions we'd fly out at 8,000 feet and rendezvous, and then go up to whatever it could be 10, 12, 15,000 feet. And as I say, in Borneo, I think it was 19,000 feet that we flew.
You fly over your target, drop your bombs, and then maneuver.
And if there were no zeros, no problem. But if there were zeros, you would
Stay together.
fight them off. But they could not. They couldn't fly any distance to follow you. So when you got away from him, then you would split up and go home alone, because it was a lot more economical in fuel consumption to fly alone rather than in formation.
Well, after your missions were over, your 44 combat missions, and you were flying these different missions to get your flight time in, how long did you stay overseas?
Oh, it took, I'd say, it was in the end of January when I flew my last combat mission. And then I had a brother who was in the 397th, and we were, about 3/4 of the time we were on the same island together. But I was able to let them pull my papers out, and I waited for about 2 weeks in Leyte, I guess.
Lady?
And until my brother came along, and then we came home on the same ship together. And we were on that 10 days in the harbor and 15 days coming across, so I was 25 days. But I came home on the same ship with my brother.
When did you leave there? And where did you leave?
We got, well, one other story. Our ship landed at I forget the name of the town below L.A. And when we landed, we got in docked about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They didn't let us off. We stayed on the ship one more night, and who's down there playing the violin for us but Jack Benny. Jack Benny was down there playing the violin for us. Then the next day they put us on a train, and we came to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and it was on that train coming west that the rumors start coming up that they're letting people out when you get back if you got enough points. And I had plenty of points, so I was home and out of the service in early June of 45. Of course, the war didn't end until August.
Where were you? Did you know anything? Where were you at when the first atomic bomb dropped?
I was out of the service, and I was visiting relatives up in Albany, New York. And we, of course, everybody, we did not know what those bombs were, you know. But we know that they had decimated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then in 1980, I retraced all my bar steps from the bar. I was in Guadalcanal, and I went to places that we had bombed and couldn't go to during the war. In Manila, when I was flying over there where the Japanese were controlling out, I went to places like that. So I lost my train of thought.
Well, what were your feelings at that time?
Oh, we had, then I was home from June, and then I had carried a Latin book with me in the South Pacific. I had decided that if I came back alive, I was going to go to the seminary. And the war ended August 15th, and I was home, and I think I was up in New York visiting my cousins. And then September 2nd, I was on these grounds studying Latin the first year. Yeah, right here on these grounds.
Right.
And it took me 9 years to get through the seminary.
But I wanted to ask you what your feelings were about the use of the atomic bomb at that time.
I never bumped into anyone who didn't think that those bombs had to be used. Now, theologians and all, and my hope is, and I did in Hiroshima in 1980, I went to that museum, and I hope nobody ever drops another atomic bomb. But at that time, the thing was that if we didn't know if Japan was going to fight to the last person. And when they dropped those bombs, Japan got out of the war right away then.
Yeah.
So that was the end of it. I think it was August 15th when...
Right, and they signed on September the 2nd.
Yeah.
August 15th, correct.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that you decided to become a priest. How long had this been on your mind?
Well, when I was working in the shop, I used to argue with a little Protestant older fella, and I was wrestling with the thing whether I should go to seminary or not, and I couldn't make up my mind, and I was taught by the Marianist brothers at Hamilton Catholic, who were at the University of Dayton, and they sent me up to Father Ferry, who was later one of their provincials and one of their head men, and I told him what my situation was. He says, well, you have to make a decision, get off the fence. And my decision was, well, I'm going to the service, and if I come back alive, I'm going to this seminary. And I carried a Latin book with me in the service. And one other little side story on that, when we were on that little island, Wakti, why there was a navigator in the crew next to us. His name was Jake Darrow, and I always thought he was a relative of the famous lawyer, Darrow. Clarence Darrow. And he had had some college, and he figured he was losing his culture and in the tropics and all this. And one day he borrowed my Latin book, and it just made him, he just enjoyed that very, very much. And he gave it back to me, and 2 or 3 days later he shot himself, killed himself. So, and I went with his crew 3 miles over to New Guinea, where he was buried. Now I think his body was later taken, I think, to Hawaii, I'm not sure. But so when I got back, I wanted to go to the seminary, and I got home in June, and at least by September I was in the seminary, and they put me in the special class, primarily studying Latin for a year. And then it took 4 years of college and 4 years of theology. So it was 9 years going through.
And what year were you ordained?
In 1954.
1954?
So I've been a priest 65 years.
65 years?
Yeah.
All here in Cincinnati?
Cincinnati, Oxford, I guess that's the farthest. Our diocese would go up to Springfield and so forth, but I never had to, I never was assigned to any of those places. I did 7 years as a Newman chaplain in Oxford, Miami University.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone else in your family become a priest?
My youngest brother went to the seminary for 2 years to hear.
Is that Fred?
No, Jim.
Oh.
Jim was the youngest one. And but then he left the seminary, and he went to Xavier for a while, and he went to Notre Dame. He was going to be a lawyer, but then he got married, and he got a job with General Motors.
What did Don end up doing?
Don...
he was a ball turret gunner.
Don, well, before the war, he worked in a foundry for a little while. Oh, he worked. He and his brother-in-law, they ran a little music and appliance store in Hamilton for a good number of years, and he had married the owner of that store. Don had 9 kids, 8 boys and 1 girl. And then after that, he was an automobile salesman for a while, and then he retired and he worked for a pizza place. And
What cars dealership did he work for?
he was working with was it Dixon? Is there a Dixon up on Route 4?
Right, Dixon, Lincoln, Mercury.
Yeah, I think that's the word. And then my brother Freddie worked in the automobile business for a long time for Miller's. And then Freddie became a real estate man. And then, well, Jim got his job, and he was in the management echelon of General Motors.
Oh, I see.
And he's still living. Don and Fred are gone, and Jim is, he's 4 years younger than me, but he's homebound, and he and his wife can't get out anymore.
Brian, do you have some questions for us?
Sure. So, Father, I was wondering, your other brothers, did they also go into the Air Corps, or were they go into different services?
Oh, Don went into the Air Corps, and Fred got into the Air Corps, and he was in England as a ground crewman in England, and Don became a Sperry Ball gunner in the same Air Force I was in. And we were together in the South Pacific a lot of times.
I think you said that you all joined at the same time?
3 of us went to the service in February of 1943.
Did you all report at the same place? Did you go together?
No, I don't know. I think I was the first one. I don't know where Don went. And he went, he was going to be a cadet, but both of us washed out of pilot training.
Oh, okay.
And I was lucky enough to go back and be an officer and a gentleman as a navigator, and Don became I guess a staff sergeant as a Sperry Ball gunner.
What did your parents think about you all going in?
Well,
around the
my
same
mother
time?
spent a lot of days in church, praying for all of us. And then Jimmy went a year later, but my mother and father had their 25th wedding anniversary when Don and Fred and I, we all got home at the same time in June of 45, and we were able to get Jimmy home on for a furlough, and he didn't go overseas with his crew, but when he got over there, the war had just ended, so he wasn't in combat.
What was Jimmy going to be? You say crew.
Well, Jimmy, and then after the war, Jimmy came to seminary for 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
And then he...
But, I mean, was he a pilot or a gunner or...
Oh, no, at that time, I think he was a chaplain's assistant or something. It was just...
okay.
He was in the Marines.
Oh, okay.
In the Marines, and he was on those ships in Tokyo Bay and all that.
I'm sorry, Brian, I interrupted you.
So you were still in Hamilton sometime before you went into service after Pearl Harbor started.
I continued to work at I joined in August 5th of 42, and I was working in the shop till February of 43. So yeah, about 6 months I would continue.
What are your memories about what was going on in Hamilton for the war effort, or rationing and things like that. What memories do you remember around town?
Well, there was certainly a lot of rationing, and once or twice I got home on furlough, and I don't know where my dad got it, but it was hard to get gas, you know, for automobile, there was a lot of rationing going on and stuff. There were no automobiles made during the war years, you know. And I had, working in the shop, I had an old Studebaker that I had second hand, but then I sold that when I went into the service. But
I was wondering, in your community, were there a lot of like Gold Star mothers and families? That sort of
and I have a picture in there of the gang I grew up with in the war. And we only lost one out of that group, and that was a live wire cousin, Adrian Beaker, and he was in the infantry and got killed in Europe. And he was that was the closest friend outside of my military friends, my own.
Where were you when you heard the news about that?
I was in the Philippines waiting for my brother to come and join me so we could come together. Roosevelt died at that time too, right in there, and then I remember getting a letter saying my cousin had died. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering about you mostly flew P-24s, or I'm sorry, B-24s?
What?
The aircraft, you were mostly
Oh, we were in,
B-24s?
yeah. Once in a while we'd be in a DC-3 or something, if maybe you were being moved, sent someplace or something, but it was B-24s is what I navigated when I never navigated anything else.
Was that the most used bomber in the Pacific?
I think they made more B-24s. The B-24 came a little bit later than the B-17, and the B-24 could go maybe a fourth or a third farther on the same gas. And when I was in the Pacific, there was only one B-17 down there that the general had as a plane. The B-17 was built around a crew. It was a more easier plane, and but as we say, it couldn't go as far. And now, early in the war, there were a lot of B-17s in the South Pacific.
I was wondering, you were talking about being on those islands out there, and you're the navigator. Were times where you were getting worried that maybe your calculations were off, that you weren't going to find an island?
No. Navigated, the big thing was accuracy in your information, and now once in a while I remember on one mission we were flying, and the lead navigator didn't know where we were going, but I told the pilot, and I said, tell him to, I had been navigating closely, and the island was clouded over where we were to drop our bombs, Woolly Eye Island. But I said, tell him to turn to 90 degrees and I'll figure it out and we'll come closer. When they turned to 90, right down there was the island. But that was one of the problems navigating if you were under clouds. Why,
when you didn't have visibility, what kind of tool? What were your instruments that you were using?
Oh, if you didn't have, you had if you were in the clouds, you were just flying in the clouds. Now you had your compass and you knew what direction you were heading in. And some of the flyers were more afraid of thunderhead clouds than they were the Japanese Zeros. So you had to avoid them. And I remember once flying on one of the missions, our plane started to ice up snow on the wings. We were up that high and enough moisture and all, whatever it was. But no, and that was the big thing was as far as getting lost, you had to see where you were coming, and sometimes you'd have to go through clouds and stuff.
So I guess you got tested to be a navigator. I mean, how did you
Well, you
get
had
that assignment?
19 weeks of school, and you did those 20 practice missions, and we had one plane, and the navigator was not supposed to be the sharpest guy, and they went out on a one-plane search mission, and they never came back. Now, the Japanese could have got them when they got close to something, or maybe they got lost and went into a mountain or something, but they never came back. So, and of course, when you're on a one-plane mission, you're on your own to go. But you were a navigator, you were trained, and I say even in on a daytime mission, I would shoot that sun shot sometimes just to know I was along at someplace now and then. But you had your log, and you knew what direction you were flying, and you knew where you should be and all. So that was the trick of being a navigator.
Before your missions, did they plot some of your targets for you?
Oh, they told us where to go and where we'd have the rendezvous point and all that. Yeah, that was...
And you had your navigation degrees to follow?
Well, they would give you that, and as a navigator, what you knew exactly.
It was critical, though, that a navigator be well qualified in the Pacific, because a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Europe, the lead navigator just led all the other planes.
Yeah, a lot of them would just
follow.
They would bomb all over, you know. Yeah, no, that was right. Well, as I say, 80% of the time we were flying alone, and you'd fly out maybe 3-4 hours, whatever it was, and you'd hit a rendezvous point where your 6 planes would get together, and then that'd be about 10 minutes away from the target, and you'd go to the target and drop your bombs, and when you'd get away from the Zeros, if there were Zeros, or you'd fly back alone. But, for example, when we were flying on a lot of those islands, say that this is New Guinea, and you're flying into New Guinea, and you'd have to know, and if your base was down here, you'd have to know when you're coming in there. If you turn that way, you're going away from your base. You'd fly that way, so you'd have to know which side you were coming in on, you know.
Right.
So, but it was pilotage was the primary source of navigation.
Yes.
So how many people were in your crew? What were the
10. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and radio operator. There was an armament man who took care of the bombs, and when over the target, they'd have to pull pins out of the bombs so they would go out before you get to the target. And that's how that guy kicked his harness out that time, you know. And
ball turret gunner.
We had a ball turret gunner, a nose gunner, a tail gunner, and 2 guys with the machine guns at the waist. And then our radio operator was a top turret gunner. So yeah.
You mentioned you had one of your duties was would be at the bomb bay doors.
Mm-hmm.
Was that was something that you had any training before, or was that just
Oh, you
something
didn't need any training.
I mean,
To get the bomb bay doors open, you had to just push that handle.
I know that, but was that something you think you were going to be doing as a navigator?
Oh, I never knew that.
That had to be.
And I'm not sure that every crew did that. Not like the guys. I don't know what the guys in Europe did or what.
That had to be a scary position, though, to be in.
Well, anytime you get near the target and they're shooting at you from the ground and there are zeros on you, it's a scary position.
But I mean, sitting there over that.
Oh, I was sitting there, and as I say, right down here is 15,000 feet, and I got about a 1 foot thing that went through between the bomb bays, yeah. And all I had to do was just get that hydraulic handle and make sure the doors didn't creep shut. And it wasn't, you didn't have to be too smart to do it.
Took a lot of guts, though, to hang in there.
Well, this was it. Once in a while there'd be guys that, and then sometimes there'd be guys who'd be shot down once and they'd be back flying, and some of them would just go to pieces if they got into any kind of trouble, you know.
Right.
But lots of times guys, if they really had problems, why they wouldn't have to fly anymore.
You know, that brings up a point when you're talking about problems. When you were in the service, did you attend very much religious services? You personally?
Oh yes, I used to go to Mass every day when we were home. We had that, right? But even the Protestant services were very well. When you're on these islands, there's not much else to do, you know. And a lot of guys know that you're facing death, you know. And then the Japanese, when we were in the Halmahera's Moritai, where there was a Japanese bases, about 3 or 4 of them, 50 miles away from us, and their planes would come over and bomb us, you know. So, yeah, so, well, you were in the combat zone, and so...
This Latin book you referred to that you carried with you, what is the Latin book?
Oh, that was just a first-year Latin book to study in Latin.
Okay.
And, of course, and then when I was in seminary, well, of course, we used to say the Mass in Latin. It was all Latin. And in my studies, 9 years, many of the books were written in Latin that we used.
You were at Mass, so as often as you could go during the war?
Oh, I did. I used to go, and we had a chapel, from here to the front door away.
Did you have a Catholic priest there, though?
We always had, and one time, when my brother and I were on 2 different islands, was a real rough time early in the Philippine stuff, I guess. And my brother's outfit was losing planes right and left. And I think they lost 21 planes or something.
Good God.
And so I would fly, and we were flying every other day there. And my brother was up on the other island. He was on Numfor, and I was on Moritai, or wherever it was. And at any rate, our chaplain came and for Mass at our place, and I said, "Have you seen my brother?" I would go into his outfit where they were supposed to be coming. I couldn't find out whether his crew had got guy. He said, "Oh yes, I saw him at Mass yesterday." So I knew my brother was, and then a couple of days later, he was there on the same island with me.
Now he was in the 397th Bomb Squadron?
Yeah.
And that was the same
That was the same Air Force.
13th,
13th Air Force.
5th Bomb Group.
I was in the 5th and he was in the 397th.
Yes, Squadron. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Both in the 5th Bomb Group. I got you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Brian.
I was wondering when you went on those missions, being Catholic and all, did you bring rosary beads with you?
Oh, a good Catholic carries rosaries all the time. Everyone does.
Were you using your rosaries when you were on the plane? Did you?
Oh, well, you had your job, you did what you did, but and some people prayed more than others on the plane, you know. Yeah.
And you were in the Philippines.
I ended up in Cebu in the Philippines.
Did you?
And we flew over. We bombed a lot of the islands.
Well, I know you mentioned later on in your career as a priest, you went to a lot of countries to study poverty, and a lot of guys that we've interviewed who were in the Philippines, they saw a lot of poverty there. I was wondering if you saw that in the Philippines and whether that was influenced your going.
Oh no, I had before I went into the service, I had made up my mind if I come back alive, I'm going to seminary.
Well, I meant more about poverty. Did you see much poverty, and what?
Oh,
you mentioned later on in your career as a priest that you studied poverty.
Well, I've been in 100 countries, and most of them. Now those pictures, that's the worst picture I've ever taken there. Can you see that or not?
Yes.
And that's Bangladesh. And I would go where lots of times it'd be the church. I'd stay with people who were out taking care of people like that. That was in a refugee center in Bangladesh, and can you see that picture?
Yes.
You can.
Yes, very easy.
The light of the window.
No, I can see it very well.
Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering if you saw any poverty when you were in the service in any of those islands.
Oh, sure. That's where I got in that article. That's where I got my first interest in Guadalcanal. These little natives, and they'd have all kind of diseases and malaria and all kinds of stuff, you know. And
New Guinea had a lot of.
oh, and New Guinea, and it was very primitive. And then up in the Philippines too, you know. And no, so that's where I got my first interest in the poverty. And then when I was Newman chaplain at Miami, we used to go down to Appalachia, to Prestonsburg, and a little town, David, Kentucky, where there were coal mines and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And one year I was Santa Claus at Christmas time, going down, and I remember going into little places where they'd have one little light bulb hanging down from the ceiling, you know.
Right.
And it was extreme. And of course, coal mining is going out of business now altogether.
Yes, in eastern Kentucky especially.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, on those islands, what were your sleeping arrangements and things?
Well, our crew, the 4 officers slept in one tent, and I guess it was maybe about as big as this room. And then the 6 enlisted men had their own tent in a little bit different area, and there'd be 6 of them. And well, you just had a little cot, and first mattress I got was one of the guys got killed in that Balikpapan plane that I was telling you, that guy's floating in the water.
Right.
Co-pilot never came back, and I inherited his little mattress on my. So that's it. And you'd have maybe I had a little cupboard of orange crate or something like that. You'd have stuff like that. Makeshift. Our enlisted men, they were sharper than we were at their tent was a little bit better than the tent of the 4 officers. But we had wood floors, you know, but sometimes you wouldn't even have a wood floor.
Were you visited by insects and things in the tents, or were they pretty?
Oh no, you slept under a mosquito net, and you took Adabrin, and my co-pilot, he came back just a little bit before me, and he was on Biak Island, which is near Numborn, in that part of New Guinea, and there was malaria, a good bit of it there, but my co-pilot came back with malaria, and he had it. I always took the Adabrin, and I always slept under the mosquito bar. Yeah. And, oh yeah, well, it's like living in the middle of the jungle, you know.
And what kind of food were you?
Well, it was all canned stuff. Like, once in a while they'd go to Australia or someplace and get some eggs, and once in a while there'd be eggs for breakfast. Otherwise you had hot cakes and canned sausage of some kind or other, and we were, especially on Morotai, we were in a coconut grove, and I would a lot of days come back after a meal and crack a coconut and eat about a third of a coconut. That was very
good nutrition.
Nutrition, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were always, almost always, we could find coconuts, you know.
I guess there was no R&R opportunities for you?
If you were still alive, oh, yeah, they would have movies. Berlin, what was his name? Irving, he was on one. Yeah, there would be USO shows. That's what I say, like Bob Hope was on that Wakti Island, and I never even, he was, I guess, a half hour late, and I didn't even go to see him. No, and I remember one time we had Oklahoma, we had
the play,
a bunch of them come through. So they would do things like that. Well, and then we would play, sometimes you'd hit periods, maybe you wouldn't fly hardly for 2 weeks or something. You'd have softball teams and stuff like that, you know, and even play basketball in the tropics. And I found when I was out of high school, I found out that cigarettes cost money, so I didn't smoke cigarettes, but you would be issued about 3 cartons of cigarette a month, and if you were on an island a fair length of time, you'd get a case of beer once a month, and I would trade my cigarettes. We had some Navy boys with the guys who built the runways and stuff.
You talking about the CBs?
CBs. And they had refrigeration, and once in a while we'd trade some cigarettes and maybe our beer for, we'd get 3 or 4 gallons of ice cream. No, and most of the time you're sitting there, and a lot of guys played cards and stuff like that, you know, and a lot of guys would read, you know, like that. But then halfway through your tour, well, you got about a week or 10 days in Australia, in Sydney, so we got to do that. And
what were some of the things you saw in Sydney? Or
well, I know we played golf down there once, and they treated us royally. And well, in a big city, you did whatever was there available to entertain yourself. And you know, of course, Sydney had plenty of meat. You know, you'd sure get steak and eggs, you know, for breakfast maybe. And so that was, that was very good. And I've been to Australia 4 times all told.
Wow.
One time we flew down to get some spark plugs or something to Townsville from New Guinea or Morotai or something. And
Have you ever made it back to any of those places?
Oh yeah, in 1980 I went to 11 countries and went to Australia, New Guinea, Guadalcanal, Rabaul, which we had bombed in the war, and I went to the Philippines, and the Japanese had it during wartime when I was down there. So I went to Manila, and then I had a friend on the island of Negros that I visited him. In Cebu, I stayed on Cebu for a while, and sometimes there'd be missionaries that I would have contact with. I would stay with them, and now, of course, in the Philippines, I don't remember. I don't remember. Well, like I went to Corregidor, and there were Japanese there too, and I'm sure the tour guides gave a different story to us than they did to the Japanese, you know. But I went to Corregidor, it took me 4 months on that tour that I went to 11 countries.
Mm-hmm.
And the only languages I learned was how to say no thank you in each language.
No, thank you.
Because they would come big. And
was your family surprised that you were going to become a priest, or was that something they kind of felt you might had an interest in?
well, I guess they didn't know I was going to go until I finally went. They didn't. But then it took me 9 years to get through. They got used to the fact.
And you started here, where we're here today?
I was here right in this part of the building. I was sitting in on high school classes and studying. They had special Latin classes for the guys who didn't have enough Latin to go through all the class.
Was there anybody else who had served in World War II?
Well, when I first came, the first year there might have been maybe 3 or 4 of us, but the next year there were about 10 or 15, and with the Trappist monastery at Gethsemane, Kentucky, why they had many ex-servicemen came there after the bar, you know, and they really had and in fact they sent one of the priests away to become a psychiatrist so he could kind of review the guys to see if they were really able to become monks.
I was, you mentioned that you would have reunions. How long did that take for that to start happening? Was that decades later, or was that more?
That I would, what?
You talked about how you would have reunions with some of the.
Oh, with the crewmates.
Yeah.
Was that decades
I'll show
later,
you my pictures there for a section there, but no, when the guys were married and had kids in school and all, we weren't able to get together too often. But then later on, when their kids were out of school and there weren't graduations and all, we met 3 or 4 times near Orlando. 3 of them moved to Florida, and the co-pilot would go down there stay at Daytona Beach for a month, and he was from North Carolina, and the pilot would go down for. Now the pilot was from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, and about every 5 years I would go through there, and he was an optometrist, and he made all my glasses. He would give me a good exam and then 2 weeks later to send me a new pair of glasses.
What was his name?
Douglas McMillan.
Oh, Doug McMillan. Yeah, I wrote that down before, yeah.
Yeah, Doug McMillan. And, and out of the 10 crewmen, we only got 7 of them together for our best reunion. A couple of them, well, one of them ended up schizophrenic after the war, and he was in the hospital for some years. He finally got out. And then a couple others weren't able to make it. So are we still recording all this?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And then I want to show you those pictures. And
is anyone else still with us alive from your crew?
no, I'm the only member of the crew alive. Now, for 9 times, I didn't go early. I went to the reunions of the 5th Bomb Group. And this lady, as I told you, her father was a medic, and that's a fabulous book.
I shall order one.
And I'll give you her email address.
Okay.
And yeah, and then in that little thing is some of my history.
Right.
That got into the Enquirer a couple of years back.
Well, I just got one last question. Have you been back on a B-24, like at Lincoln Airport or somewhere else? Have you ever had an opportunity to get
One a few years ago, I was a 24 or 17 there, and there was a doctor friend of mine was going to buy me a ticket to get on that plane and get a little 20-minute flight. I said they used to pay me for flying these things, and it was going to cost $400 or
Right.
$500 to get on. And I said I wouldn't spend $400 of anybody's money to go in there for 20 minutes. Now at a reunion out in Wichita where they made the B-29s, why they had a B-25 there. And if they would get 2 or 3 or 4 paying customers, there was a co-pilot and we got to fly on that B-25, terribly noisy airplane. And but it was just flying at 2,000 feet, maybe not even that high, for 20 minutes. And but I wouldn't go pay $400 to do that. No, I don't even the planes down there. I just by chance happened to be there the day the 29 came in.
Well, it was.
But for years I would go down and see them and all, but I don't.
Well, I'm glad you were. That's how we got acquainted.
Well, we were talking, and I knew you, and I don't know who you were, but of course that 29 had just come in. Wow.
Yes.
And I was there for lunch, you know.
Well, some of the guys from my veterans group sponsor that, and
Well, that's
and they wanted to get my attention. That's why. But I got your name before I departed you.
yes, you did. Did you ever know Bill Puther?
No.
Bill was the highest. He was a sergeant major, and he would always wear his uniform and outfit. And Bill had contacts with different groups, and once in a while he would take me to their dinners or something like that. I would do that. Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Well, thank you, Father.
Well,
listen,
no, just one second, Father. You're not finished yet. I want to personally, and for the Veterans History Project, thank you for permitting us to have this interview. But above that, I want to thank you for your service to our country, for your patriotism to our country, and for your fellowship to all of your fellow human beings in this country.
Okay, thank you much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.